Church, today we are starting a new series we're calling When Words Fail. It's actually a two-part series. When Words Fail will lead us all the way up through Easter, and then coming out of Easter, we will move into and when they don't. And what that kind of means is that we ended our last series, our sermons your therapist wishes your pastor would preach. I won't say that ever again. But we ended that series talking about our frameworks, our constructs, our language for God are often so informed by our life and our life circumstances that it actually becomes inhibiting in our ability to meet with the God of the universe. If we have a complicated relationship with our Father and exclusively call God Father, that can really get in the way. If we have been told love is scary and painful and all that goes in manipulative, and then we are told we're called to love God, that can get in the way of what it means to actually love God. And so we talked about the importance of kind of pulling away some of those words. And we are going to take that so seriously that we'll spend the next 7 weeks really pulling down the words that we use to talk about God in hopes of coming face to face with a more intimate, a more beautiful, a more transformative God. We have two 50,000-foot views of theology we're going to be operating under. For our first 7 weeks, again, this is my nerd hat. You can ignore these words or make them your whole new identity. You do you. The first is apophatic theology. Apophatic theology seeks to understand God by saying what God is not. God is not weak. God is not human. God is not whatever. And then you go, okay, well, I don't fully know what God is, but I know better by knowing what God isn't. In the same way, cataphatic theology does the opposite. It seeks to understand God by saying what God is. God is love. God is powerful. God is close by. God is Jesus, whatever else that might be. The reality is, almost none of us have ever done apophatic theology, because it's really hard to base a belief system on negation. It's really hard to have a relationship with a being who you will not frame or engage with or acknowledge in any form that is engageable. The reality is, all religious traditions, for the most part, pursue cataphatic theology. And many of us come to the assumption that that's the end goal. We come to a strong, robust, beautiful definition of God, and then can enter into a beautiful, robust, compassionate relationship with that God. But I want to actually invite us today to think of that as potentially the beginning of the journey. I want to read this quote by Dr. Marika Rose. All of our language is finite, and God is not finite. And so language fails. Hence, apophatic theology, which is really about arriving at the point of a theological silence. And the paradox here is that it's only then, when we're standing in the ruins of all of our beautiful words, that we really see God, in what Dionysius the Areopagite calls the brilliant darkness of a hidden silence. If we just talk about what God is, we end up idolaters, thinking that the images we have created with our words are the same thing as God. And we can't get to the apophatic without the cataphatic. It's not until we've pushed our language to its very extreme that we can really understand what it means for our words to fail. Denise Turner likens the apophatic to a lecturer's embarrassed pause after he realizes that he's talked too much. The apophatic comes after language, not before. Now, thankfully, I've never talked too much in an answer, so I really can't relate to that last part, but boy, the person loving the hardest is my wife. But I think we start to get a glimpse of what the apophatic can offer us in that quote by Dr. Rose. That there's this brilliant darkness and a hidden silence that is waiting on the other side of our words. I'm always and forever invested and committed. My goal in life is to introduce people to the God of the universe in the most authentic and real way that I possibly can. To pull down the things that we stick to God that are no longer serving us or are not serving God, and to let us come face to face with our Creator in a way that makes us new and different. And so apophatic theology, I believe, for St. Thomas in this season, is the doorway with which we get to come to know a God in a more full and intimate and beautiful way. And I think a really great example of that actually starts in Exodus 3. So hear this story. Moses was taking care of the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why this bush isn't burning up." Moses and I have very different responses to wildfire, but here we are. When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called out to him of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." And then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." God continued, "I am the God of your father, Abram's God, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then the Lord said to him, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of the land and to bring them to a good and broad land, a land that is full of milk and honey, a place where the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites live. Now the Israelites' cries of injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to him, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I will be with you, and this will show you that I'm the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they are going to ask, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. So say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God continued, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how all generations will remember me." There's a lot of beauty in this story. This is one of those stories that you could preach 1,000 different sermons on. And we've probably heard 1,000 different sermons about this. I love this, that God hears the cries of God's people and comes down to rescue them. I love that God invites humans to liberate other humans as the way that God's will happens on earth. I love the premise of Moses just trying to understand who this person, this being, this reality is, all that goes with that. But today we're talking about the apophatic. And the apophatic in this story is that Moses wants to know God's name. Now that, in and of itself, is not apophatic, but something about God's response radically is. Because there's a lot of layers to wanting to know someone's name. When we know someone's name, we have a semblance of control over them, right? I can say, well, Jesse was mean to me, and you know who Jesse is. I can say, Ryan has been hiding blue gloves around the church, and you know who Ryan is. I can say things about your names, including like, Jasmine is thoughtful and intelligent, and you know something about that person. Everyone's like, oh God, he's going to call my name now. No more names. Because names give us power. When we have someone's name, we have a little bit of control, a little bit of understanding, and a framework to apply to them. And so Moses is not only saying, well, they really are going to want to know who you are, so tell me. Moses is saying, why am I going to work for somebody if I don't really know what's in it for me? Moses is saying, well, who are you to tell me these things? Give me a little bit here so I can go forward. I've worked out a pretty good gig out here in the wilderness in Midian. Like, things are going fine for me. But God's response isn't a name. And here's the reality. If any of you are Hebrew scholars, I'd assume most are, you know that every time God speaks in the Bible, the Hebrew gets wonky. The Hebrew gets really weird. If you are learning Hebrew avoid all the times God talks because it's like normal language and then God speaks and words start going in weird order and verbs are being applied in funny ways. It's the authors are trying to convey to us when the voice of God speaks, something about that very voice is beyond our ability to put into language. But God says, I am who I am. It's a terrible translation in English, but that's because the language is failing. The language can't wrap itself around what is going on here. A better translation is I am the ising one. I am the one that always is ising. I am being itself. I am existence. I am a present verb existence. I am the thing that is in everything. The language starts to shatter and crumble because the concept is so radically huge that we cannot wrap our minds around it. This God of the universe, who is sitting in this bush, I guess, has made the creation so holy that to have something in between us and it is to miss who we are called to be as humans. So Moses is invited to stand on his bare feet, just as his ancestors did in the garden, and to come face to face with existence itself. Paul says, in this God you live and move and have your being. This is the idea of I am who I am, the idea of Yahweh. Yeah, if you put it in German, you get JV and you get Jehovah. The whole concept of this is our name for God misses that this is an apophatic framework for a God that is too big to put words around. A God's name that is too intense to imagine a framework within. You can't write it down. You can't even fully understand it. Moses falls awestruck on his face. He is in the presence of existence, that thing that makes us all. This, the apophatic God of our ancestors, this God that is in and of and through and informing and creating everything, this God that can speak and creation happens. There's no name that can control that God. And when we try to make God small enough to name, we miss the grandeur of the God of the universe. Just to give you some context in this story, Moses is a reject who killed somebody and is in hiding in the wilderness, and he's being told to go to the Pharaoh of the largest superpower in the world and tell them to let the people go, and just assume that happens. This is a ridiculous story. If I came to you and said, I would like you to go quickly to President Biden's office and ask him to give you $1 million, how do you think that story ends for you? It's not a good story. This is the ising one. This is the God of the universe, a God that is so much bigger and so unknowable that the only thing we can do is try to be like we were in the garden in that God's presence. Do you see where this starts to resonate for some of us, hopefully? That when we come face to face with the God that is too big for names, we are invited to go back to the way we are always intended to be. We are invited to be like we were in the garden, to take off our shoes and to recognize that creation is holy. And when we do that, everything starts to shift. It's not the God that only loves people that look like me. It's not the God who I remade in my image after God made me in God's. This is the God that is and always will be. Church, I have an invitation for us today. A little bit of homework. I want to invite each of us to pray this week 3 times without words. You can pray as many times as you want this week. But I would like you 3 times to pray without words. And let me give you some examples of that. You can pray by making funny sounds. That's fine with me. And that's your prayer. Fine. We're not putting words on it. You can pray by lighting a candle and opening your hands and taking deep breaths and trusting that the God of the universe hears those breaths and cares about them. You can pray by going for a walk and looking at what the one who is has made. You can do any number of other things. But I want to invite us each to this week in our prayer 3 times to not put language on it. To open ourselves up to a God that is bigger than that. To open ourselves up to a God that doesn't need us to say the right words to have our prayers answered. And to open ourselves up to a God that is so holy that creation reverts back to what it was always intended to be just by God's presence. This is what an apophatic God can invite us into, where we don't have to say the right words, make the right sounds, do the right thing. We just have to be in that presence, and everything shifts. Let's pray. Creator, meet us in this. Help me to let go of the parts of you that aren't of you, the things that I've placed on you that have actually shielded me from what you were trying to do. Help us as a community create space for a God that is too big to fully understand. And help us as a community, as we create that space, recognize the radical intimacy that can come from that with you. We don't need your name to know that you are here. So help us to come to an awareness of that. In your holy and mighty and always existing name. Amen. Take 30 seconds to gather our thoughts, to reflect on what was said, what we've heard, what we're thinking about, and then we will come together to discuss. We always have these 3 questions to guide us in this discussion. What sticks out to you, encourages you, excites you about what we've heard today? What makes you uncomfortable, seems untrue, frustrates or confuses you about what we've heard today? And if what we've heard is true, how do we live differently going home? But as always, those can be starting off points or things we throw out to get to the stuff that we want to talk about. Throw up your hand and Jeremy will bring you a mic. Zoom, you're welcome to unmute and share or type into the chat as well. And we will all participate in this together. So, church, what are you hearing? John?
It's on? Yeah, it is. I like what you said earlier about how like this set of verses, this passage can be interpreted in like 1,000 different ways. You know, you can preach it in 1,000 different sermons, and you can hear it like a bunch of different ways. And that was definitely true for me today. In thinking about like apophatic theology and like describing God. Like if you were to ask God, like, who are you? And God responds with, I am who I am. I had this kind of image in my brain of like, you have this whole like wall of words that you can use to describe God. And, you know, if you were given a conventional answer, he might just like point to one of those words and say, I am this, or I am this, I am love, I am power, I am strength, that kind of thing. And he takes your question and kind of, you know, flips it on its end and says, I am none of these, I am, you know, who I am, and kind of just creates this recursion of, you know, you can never really describe who God is because none of these words are kind of fit to describe who God is. So I thought of that as kind of the perfect apophatic thing of like, none of these words are fitting for who God is. And so God refers to God's self as just, I am who I am. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just thought that recursion was kind of cool. Yeah. I've never thought of it like that before, but this framework kind of works really well with that.
Yeah, thanks, John. And you see Jesus do it too. Like they come and say, hey, are you the Messiah? Like John's disciples show up and they're like, are you the one we've been waiting for? And he goes, look around. What's happening? Tell him that. Like his answer is, look at what's happening to creation, and then you make your own mind up. Like Jesus doesn't need to engage in it. Creation speaks for itself. I think in the same way that Yahweh goes, dude, the ground you're on is holy. What more do you need than that? I think there's these loops in it that you just go, no good answer comes in language that is limited. English is super limiting. Other thoughts, questions, comments? Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I enjoy. It's both really challenging and really freeing. With apathetically, you can't like get control of it, And the Ephesians 3 is a prayer I just really enjoy. But there's this kind of this dance between understanding and experience, of like praying that you understand how big God's love is, wide, deep, long, all that stuff. But then later it says, may you experience the love of Christ, though it's too great to understand fully. Mm-hmm. It's like just settling and being in it and experiencing it, though you grow in understanding that way, but it's too big to understand fully.
Yeah.
It's this give and take.
Yeah. Yeah, I love, that quote we started with of, you could hear this series as, look, everyone who tries to put words on God is failing. And that is, like the quote says the exact opposite. Actually, the way you start into the apophatic is you come to the place where your words fall short. You start with I want you to understand these things. And then as soon as you realize, you know who says, I don't know more than I think anybody else, is really, really smart people. Really, really, really smart people know that they don't know most things, right? Whereas the middle of the road intelligence folks, we have a lot of answers. The smartest are like, I don't know. It's beyond me. And there's a beauty to that. It's exactly that. You want to talk to any of your professors in seminary or a master's program, and they have all sorts of PhDs, and they can talk to the most boring and brutal detail about random stuff in church history or whatever. But when you start to say, how do you really pray? Almost all of them go, I don't know. Here's what works for me. And it's this your knowledge falls short, and you're only aware of that once you've pursued that knowledge and that love and that beauty. We're going to spend the 7 weeks after Easter redoing the cataphatic, not because the goal is to end in apophatic theology, but to have a place where we can walk towards the God that is beyond our understanding and enter into a relationship with the God that isn't. And both of those things help us go forward. So, yeah, thanks, Bo. Yeah.
I'm impressed again at how timely this sermon series is for where I think I am in my own journey. And I ran across this quote. I didn't write down who said it, so I'm sorry. I'll just plagiarize it. May we all continue to pay attention to how we might already be changing. May we not just impersonate old versions of ourselves. May we be open to gently walking away from hills on which we have planted flags, but carry with us a compassion for the person we were when we needed to put it there. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. I've always depended on that flag that I planted in that old Baptist church that I grew up in. And I'm not satisfied with that anymore, but to walk away from it feels a little bit risky. Yeah. And so I'm just excited to start thinking about God in new ways and be able to worship him better because of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Connie. Hand over here, David.
I have this image that I can't dismiss. It's like we're trying to build a structure out of dry sand. and we have to just give up and realize that I can't make anything out of this dry sand, but the entire beach is God. I don't know.
I like it.
This is the message, and then especially our homework about the prayers is making me think about how everyone can experience God, even if they don't know they are, or even if they don't know God in the way we think they should. I really like that. I think of kind of how small my vision of God was for a long time, and how it's like you can only experience God if you understand God in the way that I do, in the way that I was taught. And I know people who are very good at experiencing God that don't really know they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, they're good at standing in nature and realizing it's holy.
Yeah.
They're good at taking a breath and just being. So to me, that's so encouraging that everyone can be experiencing God, no matter what they think that is. So, yeah.
That's really good, Jana. Thank you. Cassie says, this invitation to pray without words reminds me of last week's service with the Yakima Nation. I was really moved by the dance for healing that they did. I loved that the words were not used, but the body moved in prayer. Sometimes there are no words that can be said, which is when wordless prayers are so helpful and needed. Yeah, and I want to go back to, like, for anyone that feels like we need words for prayer, and I don't know if anyone is feeling that, but like there are multiple passages about creation groaning in God's, like, longing for God's kingdom to come. And if you think rocks are out there saying, hello, Heavenly Father, please, no, they are still praying somehow. Same with my chickens and our dogs, and I don't know what else, but creation is participating in prayer, and they're not using words. Certainly not English, and really barely language if it's chickens, let me tell you. So for any of us that get hung up, and we've all grown up being taught how to pray, there's a beauty to that. We've been ending our Lenten examen practice every night with the Lord's Prayer. That's beautiful. And you know when it's never helpful to be given a bunch of words? When you're really in a lot of pain, when you're really struggling. Maybe like a couple 4-letter words can be really helpful, but the rest of the words fall really short. It took a couple seconds for some of you on that one. But this reality, when you are sitting with a friend who has lost a lot and you offer words, those words are never helpful. When you sit with them, your presence is prayer. So you're doing this all the time. And I'm so glad it is resonating. It is also going to feel unproductive at points. When you sit and pray without words, sometimes you're going to walk away and go, was that even prayer, or did I just fall asleep? Was that even prayer, or am I using that as an excuse? I want to say today it is prayer, if your intent is for it to be prayer. So let your words fall away, and don't worry about the fact that you're failing or whatever else with that. Got time for 1 or 2 more? Maybe 1? The lid doesn't come off of that pencil. Sorry, buddy. All right. I'm going to close this in prayer. Jesus, thank you for this time, for this space. May the silence that fills parts of the rest of the service be more prayerful than some of the words we choose to offer. In your holy and mighty name, amen.